I'm Mark from Ooika, and in this video we're going to be making mocha. I'm very excited to be talking about mocha and getting to taste it here on video with you. Mocha is a historic recreation of the first teas that Japanese monks who went to China back during the Song Dynasty experienced and tasted. The mocha, which is a powdered green tea, was brought back to Japan, presented to the emperor, and over time has evolved into matcha, the matcha that we know today. So there are many differences between mocha and matcha. But before I get into any of that, the point of this video is to show you how to actually brew mocha and also how to brew guapian. The mocha that we're making is made with tea drunks guapian, which is a leaf green tea, has no buds, no stems, very similar to tencha in that regard. And I milled it on my stone mill. So you get a powder that is a very close approximation to what historically would have been mocha. As I brew mocha and guapian, we can talk more about it and learn more about both guapian as well as mocha and the history of matcha. In front of me, I have my mocha making section and my guapian green tea making section. So we're gonna start with our mocha. I'm cheating with some coffee. Let's start making mocha. Here's how. If you're familiar with making matcha, it's going to be very similar, but there are a few differences. Our mocha is ground using tea drunks guapian, which is a full leaf tea. It has no buds, no stems. Very similar to tencha, which is the version of tea basically that we grind to make matcha. So there are a lot of similarities, but some differences. The mocha comes in a nice little glass jar like this, and when we open it, we'll find inside is a vacuumed sealed silver container. This is very important. You always want matcha or mocha, whatever it is, any kind of powdered tea, to be vacuum sealed. So we're going to go ahead and open this and transfer it into our jar. And notice how I'm cutting it on a semicircle. This helps me be able to direct the tea into the jar. So we'll open this up. It's so floral and savory. And you can see just how easily that pours in. Give it a little shake just to get any extra out. And there we go. We've transferred our mocha powder from the silver bag into the glass jar, which now we can use at our leisure. And it will keep it protected, safe from light, etc. Let's get to brewing. The first thing we're going to do is warm our tea bowl. I'm using a matcha bowl. Of course, you can use whatever you want. It can even be a teacup, but it's a good idea for us to warm it first. So I'm going to pour in some hot boiling water. If we don't warm the bowl, it's okay, but the result will be getting a funnel tea that is quite cold. I have my whisk. This is called the cha sen. I also want to warm this and hydrate it too. So we're just going to put it in. Now, if we want it to be fancy, there are ways we could do this more traditionally. We're not going to do that. So I'm just going to go ahead and whisk a little bit just to agitate the cha sen. We'll put it aside, and then our bowl is now warm, and we can just dump the water away, and I'll just dry the inside of the bowl now. So our bowl is warm and dry. Now it's time for the mocha. As far as the mocha goes, there's two ways I could actually put it in the bowl. One is just to put it in the bowl. Pretty simple. The second is to use a sifter. If I use a sifter, it helps break up any clumps. It also helps it incorporate a little bit better, so it's easier to whisk. So I'm going to go ahead and use this, but it's not necessary. You can just put it into the bowl, add water, and whisk it. Here's our mocha. I have a cha shaku. It's a tea scoop. You don't need this. You can just use a spoon. And I'm going to put 1 scoop in. So 1 scoop of this is about 1 gram. Now that's one of the big differences between making usucha from matcha, which is the regular bowl of frothy matcha that you think of when you think of matcha. That uses 2 grams, or about 2 scoops. And that's because mocha is a lot more dense. It's very vibrant and robust, and 1 scoop will get you all the frothing that you need, but also all of the flavor and complexity. So I'm going to use my tea scoop and just agitate it through. Okay. So now we have our mocha in our bowl. The second most important ingredient of making tea, besides your tea, is water. So we're going to go ahead and do the water now. It's important to not use boiling water. So I'm gonna cool this water down by transferring it into a glass. And I'm outside where it's fairly cold, so this will cool down in no time. But the reason we don't want to put boiling hot water in is, well, two things. One, you'll actually cook the tea. But on top of that, with green tea specifically, is it can be very bitter, overly bitter, if you put in boiling water. That's because the little particles of tea floating inside have compounds such as catechins and caffeine that are more soluble in water at higher temperatures. So if we put very hot water in, we're gonna extract all that out. Now, another trick we can do to help cool things down faster is to transfer the water between two of our cups. These are called gong dao bei. In Japanese tea, we wouldn't be doing this. We'd be using something called a yuzamashi, which is a water cooling bowl. But here we go. This is now where we want it, about 75 degrees Celsius. Yeah, right where you can touch it and hold it for a little bit without it being scaldingly hot. We have 1 gram of mocha in our bowl. We're gonna be putting about 60 milliliters, 70 milliliters of water in it at about 75 degrees Celsius. That is, again, double the intensity of matcha, where we would use basically 60 milliliters of water to 2 grams of matcha. Now we take our whisk, we're gonna put this in our bowl. We're gonna agitate the bottom of it just to incorporate it into the liquid. And then we're gonna start whisking by moving our hand back and forth. You'll notice that mocha is very forgiving when it comes to whisking. You don't have to be a wonderful expert whisker to get lots of froth. It does a very good job at frothing up pretty organically. Okay. Now we have our mocha. You'll notice that the froth on top is nice and pale with a vibrant green underneath. So we'll give it a try. I actually don't need to turn the bowl because it's already facing you. It's robust, complex, deep, and exceptionally creamy, almost milky. Okay, now we're gonna move on to making guapian, which is the unground version of this tea. We're gonna be doing that in the Chinese brewing style called gongfu brewing, or brewing with skill and effort. Let's get brewing guapian. This is the unground version of the tea that I mill into the Ooika Tea Drunk collaboration Matcha powdered green tea. So we're gonna just have the standard tea that I use to grind. And if you try it in comparison to the guapian Matcha, you'll find that there are similarities, but they really are very different and completely different. And it's a great way to experience the breadth of tea depending on the format, whether it's whole leaf, whether it's ground into powder, and it gives you a broader understanding of tea. So the first thing we're going to do is take our guapian from Tea Drunk here, and let's go ahead and open it. So I do that with a semicircle shape. You can see just like that. The reason that we cut it like this is you'll notice it makes this kind of scoop shape, I guess, and it very easily comes out. Now this guapian from China, from Luan, which is a famous and pristine terroir, has a lot in common with tencha, which is the base material that we grind into matcha. For example, it doesn't have stems and it doesn't have the bud, it's just the leaf. And that's fairly uncommon when it comes to Chinese teas. So it was a no-brainer to choose guapian to make our matcha with. We have it on our plate. This is the dry leaf, and we can give it a smell. You'll notice that dry leaf doesn't have an intensity of smell, and so I'll even tell you a little anecdote about that. Here in my hometown, there's an event called Music in the Park in the summer where Ooika set up basically a little booth where people could come and buy tea and try it and taste it. A woman came over and wanted to smell the tea to decide whether it was good tea or not. So we opened it, we put it on a little plate like this, and she smelled it and she said, "Oh, that really doesn't have much of a smell." And she walked away and didn't make a purchase. And it's probably because she's used to artificially scented teas. Things in America, when you go to the grocery store and you smell it and it smells so wonderful and you get all these notes like cinnamon and all that, it's because those teas are artificially scented. The dry leaf should not have much of an aroma. It should be very subtle and very soft. It should not be overpowering. As far as what we are looking for with our tea here is we want consistency. We don't want it to be busy or broken up, and we can see that this is very consistent, and this is a marker a very good tea, which is what we'd expect coming from Tea Drunk. So Ooika is very privileged to be able to get access to such great material to grind into our mocha. Enough of that, let's go ahead and brew this so we can have a cup of tea here on this beautiful, cool autumn day. The first thing we're going to do is cool down our water. This water is boiling hot. Just like our mocha, we don't want to use boiling hot water. We want to use water that's slightly less hot so we don't cook the tea and so we don't bring out too much astringency or bitterness. This is about 200 milliliters. The actual amount, it's not so important because making tea is a function of multiple variables that you can change, right? You can change the amount of tea, the amount of water, and the duration of steeping, also the temperature of the water. So we're gonna continually pour this between two fairness pitchers called gong dao bei in Chinese. And we're looking for the water to be at a point where we can touch the glass without it immediately scalding us. So right now it's still a little too warm. And we don't wanna have the water splash, but we can lift it up, which will help cool it. There's a saying in tea, which is water high, tea low. When we have our water like this, it's okay to go a little high, but when we have tea, we don't want to be showy or flashy like this. Here's our pre-warmed gong dao bei that still has moisture in it. So I'm gonna go ahead and put our tea leaf in, and I'll give it a little shake. And this is going to slightly hydrate and slightly release some of the aroma in the leaf. And now we can smell it. Guapian is just such a wonderful tea. It's so savory, there's a subtle sweetness like sugar cane. Now we can brew, we can pour our water over our guapian. The steeping time here is about a minute or so. More important than any specific time is just to look and watch the leaf. And what we'll find is right now the leaf is still very dry, it's still very tight, and frankly, it looks as if it's thirsty. We know that our first infusion here is done when the leaf looks like it's awoken, when it's not thirsty, when it's started to open up and become plump. So it still looks fairly tight. I know it needs a little bit more time. And just to come up and give you a close-up, you can see there the tea leaf still looks like it needs a little bit more time. Still fairly tight, but it is opening up and becoming a little bit lighter in color. But you know it's ready when it doesn't look thirsty anymore. It's been about a minute and we can see that the leaf has started to open up. It doesn't look thirsty, so that's my cue to drink. So I have a strainer here and I'm going to gently pour the tea liquor out. And again, I'm keeping this fairly low without touching the strainer itself because again, water high, tea low. There we go. Notice that I'm leaving some liquid at the bottom. That's because we want to make sure that the tea leaf is submerged under the water. It's basically forming a seal, but just enough so that the tea isn't exposed to the air above it. And now we have our first steeping of guapian. Okay, let's give it a try. It's so warm and savory. It has a natural sweetness. It's just a wonderful tea, and I'm so excited for you to be able to try it. With fine Chinese teas, we can actually brew it more than once. In fact, with guapian, we can do 3 steepings. So we finished 1 steeping. Let's move on to do our second steeping. And it's a little bit different than the first. In this case, we're going to be using boiling water instead of cooling it down. That's because the liquid in here is already going to be cool. We'll go ahead and do our second steeping. You'll notice that I'm keeping it directed in one point, and if I'm lucky, you'll see it will swirl just a little bit. Now our second steeping is done pretty much right off the bat. We know that we have the second steeping right when all the tea leaves are floating in the middle. So let's go ahead and pour it out. When we do our first steeping, we can judge how good of a job we did by our second steeping. So the first steeping, all the leaves will be at the top of the gong dao bei. The second steeping, they should all be in the middle. And the third, final steeping, they'll all be at the bottom. So if you do your first steeping, and then you go to your second and you find that all of the tea leaves are at the bottom of the glass, it means that your first steeping was too long or too hot. Now after we go ahead and drink that guapien, we can do our third and final steeping, and it works pretty much the same way as our second. We don't need to wait a minute. Once we put the boiling water in, it's pretty much done after 5 or 10 seconds. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and do the third steeping now and just combine it with the second steeping. You can see the subtle roll right there. It's very clear that most of the leaves are at the bottom. There's a few that are floating at the top. It's actually much easier to see from the top down. Maybe you'll be able to see on that camera, which tells us it's our final steeping. And because it's our final, I'm going to go ahead and dump all the liquid out because we don't need to keep it covered because, well, at this point, we've gotten all of the extraction out of the leaf that we can possibly get. Now, like I said, I've combined both the second and third steeping. It's probably a better idea that you don't do that unless you have to. Because you'll find that the second steeping will taste different than the first or even the third. Every steeping will be different. And part of the joy of drinking tea is getting to experience the change of the tea, the flavors, the aromas, the textures, and how they shift depending on where in the brewing sequence you are. There we go. We have brewed our guapien loose leaf style, gongfucha style, and we've also earlier made our mocha, which is our ground version of the same tea, and made a bowl of it. Let's now make mocha using what you'd have at a traditional home here in America, somewhere that you don't have a whisk, maybe you don't have a chashaku, any of these tools that are specialized. Well, it turns out we can make a very satisfying foamy cup of usucha from our mocha with just an everyday Tupperware container. So it's very simple. It is a little surprising. Getting a whisk maybe makes it better, but maybe not. In any event, we're going to go ahead and get started. We want to make sure that we have a Tupperware or a mason jar or anything with a lid. That's the important thing, is that it has the lid. I'm going to take our mocha and I'm going to use a strainer. You can use any strainer, or you can just skip the strainer. It's really not necessary. It will just help us break up the clumps and make it easier to incorporate. But if we don't use a strainer, we just have to shake a little bit longer when we get to that step. And we're going to put in 1 gram, which you can either weigh out on a scale. Now we'll go ahead and sift that in. And now we're going to add our water. It's important not to use boiling water. We want to use around 75 degrees Celsius. That's basically hot enough that where when we touch the glass, it won't immediately scald us. We can hold it for a few seconds before it gets uncomfortable. That's about the right temperature. This is about ready to go. So I'm going to put in 60 milliliters of water. Approximately. Let's put our lid on and make sure it's sealed. Very important that it's sealed. And to help make things extra safe, I'm going to wrap it in a cloth just so there's no chance of spilling. And then we can shake. And we can see when I open it, there is indeed foam on top. So we're going to go ahead and transfer that into our bowl, set it aside, and we'll give it a try. It's so nice and warm and savory. It's really a wonderful powdered tea, mocha. And you can see that you can make it at home with just the Tupperware. You don't need all of these tools. So the barrier to entry to enjoying a good bowl of mocha is very low. Of course, if we did use the tools, especially just a simple whisk, you'd probably get a resulting tea that's a little bit more creamy. But you'll find that this is perfectly acceptable, perfectly smooth. There's no graininess or anything, and that is actually because we mill it using a traditional stone mill imported from Japan. So there won't be that gritty sandiness that comes with it. So in this video, we covered how to make mocha using traditional tools, how to make mocha using just standard Tupperware, and how to brew the loose leaf variety, the unground version of our mocha from guapien. I'd encourage you to try the mocha if you get a chance. It's really a wonderful opportunity to put yourself in the shoes of those Japanese monks who went to China during the Song Dynasty and experienced tea for the first time. There was no tea in Japan at this point, and they tried a tea that was in many ways similar to the Matcha, which we're grinding now. It's a historic recreation of that early Song Dynasty tea. And by putting yourself in the shoes of those early monks, you can maybe get a broader understanding of tea. And what's really exciting to know is that at some point, A7SIII, who is the Japanese monk that's first credited with bringing tea to Japan, sat down and had a bowl much like this of Matcha and realized that Japan could really benefit, and the monks in Japan and the people could benefit from tea, the tea plant, which was unknown to him at the time back home in Japan, and he brought it to Japan. And all of tea culture, all of matcha that we know it today, stemmed from enjoying a bowl not too unlike what's in front of me here. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon. Domo arigatou gozaimashita.